Welcome to Podkey Daily News, your fast brief on conflict, markets, tech, and policy. Today's pressure points are unusually clear. War is widening by drone, energy routes are getting riskier, and some of the biggest balance sheet bets in tech still barely show up on the balance sheet. Ukraine launched its biggest single-day aerial attack so far, sending more than 800 drones at Russian regions and hitting military sites, logistics hubs, energy assets, and defense-linked industry. The practical aim is to raise costs inside Russia by straining fuel, transport, and supply chains, and by bringing the war closer to daily commercial life. Russia is answering with heavier strikes on Ukrainian ports and grain storage, taking advantage of Ukraine's air defense shortages, including scarce Patriot missiles. Why it matters beyond the battlefield is grain and spillover risk. Drones are already crossing into NATO territory, with incursions shot down over Romania and Latvia, and some unexplained devices in Europe appearing to originate inside Europe rather than from long-range launches. What to watch next is whether electronic warfare and air defense gaps turn these incidents from manageable disruption into a broader NATO security problem. The Gaza negotiations are still blocked on sequencing. Hamas has signaled openness to gradual disarmament tied to an Israeli withdrawal, while Israel wants weapons surrendered before any pullback or reconstruction begins. Jared Kushner has reportedly been in unusually direct contact with Hamas through meetings in Egypt, pressing for verifiable disarmament and a handoff of Gaza governance to a new Palestinian committee. Israel does not trust that committee and wants stronger outside oversight. Even a first-stage deal depends on Israel honoring ceasefire commitments on aid and halting attacks, and that is already in doubt because strikes have resumed, with Israel saying it is targeting militants. Netanyahu's domestic politics are a major constraint here, because far-right coalition pressure ahead of an election gives him reason to resist concessions or slow-roll compromise. Behind the scenes, officials are discussing a new Gaza police force, an international stabilization presence, and strict arms verification mechanisms, but none of that matters unless the sequencing fight moves. Oil markets are reacting to a wider regional risk map, not just the Strait of Hormuz. Brent has been pushed up to around $91 a barrel, and the focus is extending to Bab el-Mandeb, where roughly 5 million barrels a day move through, and where Saudi exports are using the route as a partial workaround for Hormuz risk. If disruption spreads there, the supply shock gets much larger and Iran-aligned groups gain more leverage. The Houthis are framing their actions as pressure on Saudi exports rather than a total maritime shutdown, which leaves room for more escalation while keeping ambiguity in play. At the same time, Trump's reported threat to bomb Oman stands out because Oman is one of the few active mediators with Iran over reopening Hormuz. Threatening a mediator would weaken one of the last functioning diplomatic channels. So what matters next is whether rhetoric turns into action, or whether mediation still contains the shipping risk. In the US, 30 states are suing Meta, arguing Instagram and Facebook deliberately used addictive design features like infinite scroll, likes, and push notifications to capture children's attention and increase profit. The damages claim is enormous, potentially up to $1.4 trillion, though Meta is highlighting that number publicly. The more immediate impact is the remedy side. If the states win meaningful relief, platforms could face tougher age checks and rules like no overnight push notifications for minors, similar to measures already ordered in New Mexico. That would affect product design, youth engagement, and potentially the wider social media industry, not just Meta. The next big tech story is not what companies spent on AI last year, but what they have already committed to spend later. 9 major firms, including Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft, are estimated to have about $3 trillion in future AI-related commitments through chip orders, equipment purchases, and data center leases that mostly do not yet show up clearly on balance sheets. That compares with about $600 billion of AI capital spending in the past year. The accounting matters because recognition often waits for delivery or lease start dates, but the contractual obligation can already be real. If AI demand or profitability disappoints, companies could still be stuck paying for underused chips and facilities. The structures are getting very long-dated too, including Meta's 20-year guaranteed data center lease tied to its Hyperion project and OpenAI's 20-year Ohio lease backed by SoftBank and an NVIDIA financial backstop. What to watch is whether investors start treating these hidden commitments as a credit and earnings risk rather than a pure growth story. The USS Abraham Lincoln has been out for more than 260 days, and reports from the ship describe the kind of strain that starts small and becomes operationally serious. Sailors are dealing with shortages of hygiene items and fresh food, delayed mail and care packages, plumbing problems, unpredictable watch rotations, and deep fatigue. The USS George Washington is meant to provide relief, but the Navy has no standard handoff window, so the end date is uncertain. Commanders describe the deployment as intensely busy but manageable, while critics are warning that mental health and readiness risks rise when deployments stretch this far. That gap between official reassurance and lived conditions is the point to watch. Malaysia is one of the clearer economic winners from the AI build-out right now. Its economy grew 5.8% in the second quarter, and manufacturing rose 7.5%. Helped by chip packaging, assembly, testing, and data center investment. The country is benefiting from China Plus One supply chain moves and lower tariff exposure, which makes it attractive for back-end AI infrastructure work. The opportunity comes with limits. Malaysia faces local protests over the energy and water demands of data centers, and it is also under U.S. scrutiny over allegations that it can serve as a conduit for illicit chip shipments to China. The government wants to move into chip design and more advanced production, but doing that next to Singapore's established lead will be difficult. In the American West, Lake Powell has dropped to a record low and is now about 30 feet away from the level that could halt power generation at Glen Canyon Dam. Lake Mead is also near record lows, and together those reservoirs support about 40 million people. The structural problem is that the Colorado River is now expected to provide only about half the water allocated under current agreements, while the basin states still have not replaced a nearly century-old pact with something realistic. This is no longer just a drought story. It is a power, agriculture, municipal supply, and interstate policy story all at once. Russia's anti-war party Yabloko was removed from the ballot after first being allowed to run, and its deputy chair Lev Schlossberg got an 11-year sentence, a sign the Kremlin still fears visible anti-war sentiment, even with repression already severe. The U.S. is threatening 50% tariffs on about $20 billion of Canadian exports, unless Ottawa addresses complaints over alcohol restrictions, dairy, and procurement, with last-ditch talks underway before the deadline. Airlines are keeping fares firmer than fuel prices alone would suggest because many are still working through earlier fuel costs and do not want to trigger a price war, even as IATA expects global profits to be cut roughly in half this year. And Attorney General Todd Blanche declined to give a categorical pledge that the Justice Department will always act independently of the White House, which will keep scrutiny on prosecutorial independence high. That's the brief for now. Thanks for listening to Podkey Daily News. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.